Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast Why You Do What You Do. The podcast talks about human, human development and psychology to try and help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. Excuse me. And last time we were talking about symbolic development and spatial thinking, and that is, something that children develop gradually. And it helps you navigate your world. It helps you to understand, what this means and that means, and, where everything is and what everything's up to. So we'll pick back up on dual representation hypothesis. Proposal that children under the age of 3 have difficulty grasping spatial relationships because of the need to keep more than one mental representation in mind at the same time. And if you've tuned in before, you've heard me say that little people crazy. Basically, their brains are born unwired. There's the basics for survival, and then the higher thinking and functioning develops as they experience the world and they learn and grow. So at first, keeping more than one thing in the mind just not going to happen. One-track mind is what the little people's got. According to the dual representation hypothesis, what makes the second task harder is that it requires a child to mentally represent both the symbol and its relationship to the thing it stands for at the same time. With the shrinking machine, children do not have to perform this dual operation because they are told that the room and the model are one and the same. 3-year-olds do not seem to have this problem with models. So, once you get to be about 3 and 4, you can have, representational thinking, as far as like, if this happens in the real world and you pretend this happens with this thing, it's similar. So, you got to be able to think of two things at once before, you can do that. So, it'll happen eventually. Causality. Although Piaget recognized that toddlers have some understanding of a connection between actions and reactions, he believed that even preoperational children cannot yet reason logically about cause and effect. Instead, he said, they reason by transduction. They view one situation as a basis for another situation, often one occurring at about the same time, whether or not there is a logically or causal relationship. For example, they may think that their bad thoughts or behavior cause their own or another child's illness or their parents' divorce. And we would know that's not logical thinking. But to a child, they don't understand that yet. Like I said about the baby who kicks and the mobile moves, he's going to keep trying to do that. Or if he moved and a sunbeam appeared, he's going to keep trying to do that. So, they don't quite have logic down yet. Understanding of identities and categorization. The world becomes more orderly and predictable as preschool children develop a better understanding of identities. The concept that people and many things are basically the same even if they change in form, size, or appearance. This understanding underlies the developing self-concept. Because, sometimes things do change shape. People can change shape, such as if your mommy got pregnant, or she gained weight or lost weight. Like a prime example, oh my goodness, I'm going to sneeze, is my husband used to have a pretty big mustache. And when my little one was about 3 or 4, he shaved that off. My toddler was not happy about that. He was rather upset. He cried. He was not too sure about this. Are we sure this is Dad? Because this is not. And where's the mustache? Dad has a mustache. And, in water play, they, do experiments with children, like, which holds more, this or that. So things change, and it's important for them, to realize that sometimes people get sick, sometimes they don't feel good, and animals too. So this is important in their development to understand that things can change a little bit on a daily basis and still be consistently the same in the long term. Animism, tendency to attribute life to objects that are not alive, such as stuffed animals or dolls. That's a very common thing that children do, and it's pretend, and they're using their imagination and being creative, so that's an alright thing. How do children distinguish living from non-living things? When Piaget asked young children whether the wind and clouds were alive, their answers led him to think they were confused about what is alive and what is not. The tendency to attribute life to objects that are not alive is called animism. But when later researchers questioned 3- and 4-year-olds about something more familiar to them, differences between a rock, a person, and a doll, the children showed they understood that people are alive, and rocks and dolls are not. They did not attribute thoughts or emotions to rocks, and they cited the fact that their dolls cannot move, or that they can't move on their own, as evidence that dolls are not alive. So, they understood a little bit of that. Okay. Let's see. Immature aspects of preoperational thought. According to Piaget, one of the main characteristics of preoperational thought is centration, the tendency to focus on one aspect of a situation and neglect others. And unfortunately, there are adults who are still kind of stuck in that mindset. He said preschoolers come to illogical conclusions because they cannot decenter, think about several aspects of a situation at one time. Centration can limit young children's thinking about both physical and social relationships. Conservation. A classic example of failure to understand conservation, the fact that two things that are equal remain so if their appearance is altered, so long as nothing is added or taken away. Piaget found that children do not fully grasp this principle until the age of concrete operations, and that they develop different kinds of conservation at different ages. So, sometimes, some kids are faster, some kids are slower. And like I said, sometimes we have grown-ups that kind of can't think about more than one aspect of a thing. Usually that's because they were self-centered, kind of, not going to go there, but I did. The ability to conserve is also limited by irreversibility. Failure to understand that an operation or action can go two or more ways, because it can, and a lot of grown-ups also don't think about that. They don't think about the fact this might not work, this might fail. Once Timothy can imagine restoring the original state of the water by pouring it back into the other glass, he will realize that the amount of water in both glasses is the same. Egocentrism. Egocentrism is a form of centration. According to Piaget, young children center so much on their own point of view that they cannot take in another's. And again, there's adults stuck in that way of thinking. 3-year-olds are not as egocentric as newborn babies, but, said Piaget, they still think the universe centers on them. Again, there's grown-ups stuck in this stage. Egocentrism may help explain why young children, as we will see, sometimes have trouble separating reality from what goes on inside their own heads, and why they may show confusion about what causes what. When Jeffrey believes that his bad thoughts have made his sister sick, or that he caused his parents' marital troubles, he is thinking egocentrically. My goodness. Do young children have theories of mind? Piaget was the first scholar to investigate children's theory of mind, their emerging awareness of their own mental processes and those of other people. He asked children such questions as, where do dreams come from? And what do you think with? On the basis of the answers, he concluded that children younger than 6 cannot distinguish between thoughts or dreams and real physical entities and have no theory of mind. However, more recent research indicates that between ages 2 and 5, children's knowledge about mental processes, their own and others, grows dramatically. Because, you start to know your own mind and you realize when, like, your parents or somebody is thinking, they kind of pause and you see them, kind of, the wheels are turning in there. So, again, we learn more as we study more. So, knowledge about thinking and mental states. Between ages 3 and 5, children come to understand that thinking goes on inside the mind, that it can deal with either real or imaginary things, that someone can be thinking of one thing while doing or looking at something else, that a person whose eyes and ears are covered can think about objects, that someone who looks pensive is probably thinking, and that thinking is different from seeing, talking, touching, and knowing. So, they start to realize, hey, other people are thinking about stuff too. Stuff is popping up in their head, not just mine. Again, like I say, if they can socialize properly. False beliefs and deception. A researcher shows 3-year-old Mariella a candy box and asks what is in it. Candy, she says. But when Mariella opens the box, she finds crayons, not candy. What will a child who hasn't opened the box think is in it? The researcher asks. Crayons, says Mariella, not understanding that another child would be fooled by the box as she was. And then she says that she herself originally thought crayons would be in the box. So, clearly at that age, they know how to lie. But, that's, again, an error that, they make. And sometimes adults make, I don't know if you've ever had a family member give you something for Christmas and they wrapped it in a different box and you think this is what you got. And then you go, oh, it's something different, and that's kind of funny, I think. But, the world will put some stuff on us sometimes and you think one thing is another thing and it's not, and we can be deceived by our false beliefs. Distinguishing between appearance and reality. Related to awareness of false beliefs is the ability to distinguish between appearance and reality. Both require a child to refer to two conflicting mental representations at the same time. According to Piaget, not until about 5 or 6 do children understand the distinction between what seems to be and what is. Much research bears him out, though some studies have found this ability beginning to emerge before age 4. So, again, they took what one person did and they built on it, and that's how we learn. Distinguishing between fantasy and reality. And some adults have problems with that. Sometime between 18 months and 3 years, children learn to distinguish between real and imagined events. 3-year-olds know the difference between a real dog and a dog in a dream, between something invisible, such as air, and something imaginary. They can pretend and can tell when someone else is pretending. And that's also a skill, because you have to be able to distinguish what's real and what's not. Now there's people with, schizophrenia and psychosis that kind of overlaps here and there, and people with night terrors when they're not fully awake. But usually this is something that you master, like we were talking about in, toddlerhood here, that you know the difference between these things. Digging deeper, imaginary companions. At 3.5, Anna had 23 sisters with such names as Auk, Elmo, Zenny, Aggie, and Ankle. She often talked to them on the telephone since they lived about 100 miles away in the town where her family used to live. During the next year, most of the sisters disappeared, but Auk continued to visit, especially for birthday parties. Auk had a cat and a dog, which Anna had begged for in vain. And whenever Anna was denied something she saw advertised on television, she announced that she already had one at her sister's house. But when a live friend came over and Anna's mother happened to mention one of her imaginary companions, Anna quickly changed the subject. So the kid knows the difference between imaginary and real, and they'll play. That's just a fact. And that fantasizing and that play is a way of dealing with things. So clearly, in this case, Anna was probably disappointed that they moved. And, she might have had friends there or whatever. So she made up these, sisters that live 100 miles away that she can still talk to. It's still a connection to her old, life. And the disappointment at the things she didn't get, she dealt with that by saying, oh, well, my sister has that at her house. It's okay. So that's how she dealt with her disappointment. But then when a real friend come over, of course, she's not going to want mom to mention her imaginary sister, Auk. That's kind of crazy. So kids know. And kids will deal with things in their own way. So, Influences on theory of mind development. Some children develop theory of mind abilities earlier than others. This development reflects brain maturation and improvements on cognition. Hereditary and environmental influence play a large part. And like I said, there are some adults who don't even know their own mind, and that's sad. There's different reasons for this, but, it can be a fact. Language and other cognitive abilities. Preschoolers are full of questions. How many sleeps until tomorrow? Who filled the river with water? Do babies have muscles? Do smells come from inside my nose? Young children's growing facility with language helps them express their own unique view of the world. And like I said, they're all different. So you can't compare the two. It's all apples and oranges. All of them are different. So, my oldest one asks questions constantly. It drove my husband nuts because a lot of times he didn't have answers. And then, one of my other ones hardly ever asked questions, and we were a little concerned about that, but then he got better about doing that as he got older. So it all works out. Language development. Preschoolers make rapid advances in vocabulary, grammar, and syntax. The child who, at 3, describes how daddy hatches wood, chops it with a hatchet, or asks mommy to piece her food, cut it into little pieces, may, by the age of 5, tell her mother, "Don't be ridiculous," or proudly point to her toys and say, "See how I organized everything?" And, as we'll see, language may play a part in the development of memory and the predictability of intelligence. Because in general, the more and the better at talking the child is, the more intelligent they're going to be later on. Vocabulary. At 3, the average child can use 900 to 1,000 different words and uses about 12,000 each day. By the age of 6, a child typically has a spoken vocabulary of 2,600 words and understands more than 20,000, having learned an average of 9 new words a day since about 1.5 years of age. With the help of formal schooling, a youngster's passive or receptive vocabulary, which are words that they can understand, will grow 4 times as large to 80,000 words by the time they enter into high school. And that is if you hear these words. Now, there are, unfortunately, children who do not have equal educational opportunities or whose parents are ignorant and they don't, have this type of vocabulary themselves. So, again, everybody's different, but that's general. How do children expand their vocabulary so quickly? Apparently, they do it by fast mapping, which allows them to absorb the meaning of a new word after hearing it only once or twice in conversation. That's why your teachers had you use those spelling words in a sentence, so they knew you understood them. From the context, children seem to form a quick hypothesis about the meaning of the word and store it in memory. Linguistics are not sure how fast mapping works, but it seems likely that children draw on what they know about the rules for forming words, about similar words, about the immediate context, and about the subject under discussion. Grammar and syntax. The ways in which children combine syllables into words and words into sentences grow increasingly sophisticated during early childhood. At age 3, children typically begin to use plurals, possessives, and past tense and know the difference between I, you, and we. However, their sentences are generally short and simple, often leaving out small words such as a and the, but including some pronouns, adjectives, and prepositions. Most of their sentences are declarative. Kitty wants milk, but they can ask and answer what and where questions. Why and how are harder to grasp. We start picking up grammar as we go along. We reproduce the syntax of people we've heard speak. Mine might probably throw you off because, like I said, I had a stroke, and sometimes words are not my friends. But generally, people speaking English in England have a certain syntax. People speaking English in America have a certain syntax. People speaking French have a certain syntax. So, it depends on what you've heard growing up, and that's what you will reproduce. Pragmatics and social speech. As children learn vocabulary, grammar, and syntax, they become more competent in pragmatics, the practical knowledge of how to use language to communicate. This includes knowing how to ask for things, how to tell a story or joke, how to begin and continue a conversation, and how to adjust comments to the listener's perspectives. These are all aspects of social speech. Speech intended to be understood by a listener. So that's an important skill to be able to get your point across to people and tell them what you need and want. So that's actually a survival skill that you be able to communicate your needs and wants to another person. So, social speech is an important part of growing up. Private speech. Anna, age 4, was alone in her room painting. When she finished, she was overheard saying aloud, "Now I have to put the pictures somewhere to dry. I'll put them by the window. They need to get dry now. I'll paint some more dinosaurs." Private speech, talking aloud to oneself with no intent to communicate with others, is normal and common in childhood, accounting for 20 to 50% of what playing with sounds and words the children aged 4 to 10 say. So if your kid's talking to themselves, that's normal. Don't worry about it. Now if you hear them answering in another voice, that's something to worry about. Or if you hear them arguing with someone, we had worries with one of our children because their imaginary friend was telling them bad things to do. So we had to intervene on that one a little bit. But, kids talk aloud. They mutter. It's not a big deal. So, this is how they express fantasies and emotions, that they will think out loud or mutter in barely audible tones to themselves. And that's just another way that they're processing, what's going on. Delayed language development. About 3% of preschool-aged children show language delays, though their intelligence is usually average or better. Boys are more likely than girls to be late talkers. And like I said, one of my children had Asperger's, and he was in his toddlers, and he was still not talking. And we asked the doctor about it, and we told him about the other little thing he was doing, and how he acted, and so and we took intervention, and he's one of the most social kids I got now. So you can't judge a book by its cover. Social interaction in preparation for literacy. To understand what is on the printed page, children first need to master certain pre-reading skills. Emergent literacy refers to the development of these skills, along with the knowledge and attitudes that underlie reading and writing. So, if the people that they're interacting with value reading and writing, then they will too. If they don't, then they probably won't. So, the social way you handle reading and writing is going to affect them. So you need to be positive about it. Read to them, teach them to read, have them be writing things down, help them with homework, and teach them that homework's important and their schoolwork's important. And this prepares them for literacy, because in this day and age, in the world of computers, you do not want your child to be illiterate, because that is going to hold them back on what they can do in life. That might have not been true in the 1800s, but it is now. Excuse me. Information processing approach, memory development. Memory is often compared to a filing system that has 3 steps or processes: encoding, storage, and retrieval. To file something in memory, we first must decide which folder to put it in. For example, people I know or places I've been. Encoding attaches a code or label to the information to prepare it for storage, so that it will be easier to find when needed. Storage is putting the folder away in the filing cabinet. The last step, retrieval, occurs when the information is needed. We then search for the file and take it out. Difficulties in any of these processes can interfere with efficiency. And retrieval is my problem. I know it's there, I can remember it, but getting it out and out of the mouth is where I have problems due to that stroke. But the memory's there, it's fine, it's just retrieving it is a problem. Recognition and recall. When trying to retrieve information from memory, preschool children, like people of all ages, do better with recognition, identifying something encountered before, then on recall, reproducing information from memory. For example, they can more readily recognize a missing mitten in a lost and found box than recall how the lost mitten looks. Both recognition and recall are forms of explicit memory, and both abilities improve with age. The more familiar children are with information, the better they can recall it. Recall also depends on motivation and on the strategies a child uses to enhance it. So they might recognize their own stuff, but they might not be able to recall like where it is, how it got there. By contrast with the ability to call up past memories, young children prospective memory, the ability to remember to do something at a later time, and that goes as you get older, such as bringing a book to preschool the next day, is relatively developed by ages 4 and 5 and improves only modestly by age 7. And like I said, the older you get, you start losing that. Forming childhood memories. Memory of experiences in early childhood is rarely deliberate. Young children simply remember events that made a strong impression, and most of these early conscious memories seem to be short-lived. How do children begin to form permanent memories? To answer that question, one investigator has distinguished between 3 types of childhood memory that serve different functions: generic, episodic, and autobiographical. And I'm going to leave you there. So I hope that this has helped you to think more about maybe why you do what you do. Until next time.